Hey, I'm back from the injured list and I don't need rehab.
You are Locked On MLB, your daily MLB podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, baseball fans. Welcome to Locked On MLB, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, where it's your team every day. This is the daily podcast. We talk about all the Major League Baseball. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully. I can be found talking about baseball all year long. I'm a little bit out of it because I've missed a couple of days here, but I'm back in it. You can follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it now, and on the Instagrams. I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram. But the best way to get a hold of us is to just leave messages on YouTube and tell your friends. And if you're going to be posting stuff, and on all of the social media sites, make sure to use that hashtag Everyday Sully so we have an idea who is listening to us. So believe it or not, that helps out. And today's episode is brought to you by our good friends over at FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Download the app or head to FanDuel.com to get started. So, hi everyone, I'm back. I missed the last show I did. I vomited in the middle of it, and it turns out your buddy Sully had to go to the hospital where I stayed overnight. It's Tommy John surgery. I need to take something from here, put it there, and then they put it right back. So, but I'm back and I'm rehabbing. And as our good friend Jet Black Onyx says, it's okay to take a day off if you're not well. Sully, take care of yourself, bro. Well, bro, I appreciate that, but yeah, I'm back. I couldn't wait to come back. And before we do anything else, let's talk about the trivia question. The trivia question was the Red Sox of 2004. Sorry, Yankee fans. The Red Sox of 2004 had one of the most reliable starting pitching staffs in the team's history. And 5 pitchers started all but 5 games of that season. Who was the only starting pitcher other than Martinez, Schilling, Lowe, Wakefield, and Arroyo who started more than one game? And Big John 08865 got it right. Byung Kim. I actually did a double take when I was trying to figure out the answer to that. Byung Kim, best known as being the Diamondbacks' answer to Calvin Schiraldi, letting up all those home runs to the Yankees in the 2001 World Series as a member of the Diamondbacks, only to be saved by the Diamondbacks' magnificent rally in the bottom of the seventh, on the bottom of the ninth in Game 7. Sorry, he came to the Red Sox and was talented. He didn't pitch particularly inspirational ball for the 2003 Red Sox, and they put him in the rotation, and he made 3 starts, and there you go. So that's the answer to it. Hey, Jeff Cohen is here. Says he's in Everyday Sully, and I'm glad I'm off the IL. You and me both, pal. You and me both. Hey, he did it. I did an episode the other day where I was talking about the free agents and who are left, and that there's some players out there who could find a home. And we saw that today. Jose Quintana uh, signed with the Milwaukee Brewers. And I'm going to talk more about that tomorrow. I have Chuck Freeman of Locked On Brewers is going to be my guest tomorrow. We're going to talk about the Brewers and the National League Central in general. So, and I like that signing because not that, Jose Quintana is not the second coming of Tom Glavine or Tom Seaver, but he's a major league pitcher. And if now you can take a major league pitcher and insert him into your roster for just some money, $3 or $4 million would probably do the trick. That would probably do well. Now we're starting to see a lot of pitchers are getting injured, and there's injuries left and right. And I do think no small part of it has to do with the fact that we're emphasizing only speed when we sign and develop pitchers, and the idea of a junk ball pitcher who throws 250 innings or a smart pitcher who outfoxes the opponents instead of blowing them away, those are risky to sign and develop because they don't have the numbers to always back them up. You have to do something subjective. So everyone has to throw 100 some miles an hour, and everyone's arm looks like spaghetti by the time we get to September. And you have to have things like the Dodgers starting guys who had only made 3 appearances all season long in the World Series. I digress. The Yankees are experiencing some injury issues. Heel, man, whenever you hear things like, oh, he's going to be shut down for this or that or the other thing, and it's a young pitcher who's thrown more innings than he's ever pitched in his life, red flag, which means there's a lot of vulnerability going on with the Yankees right now. The American League East is not a done deal for the Yankees, especially if they're going to have some rotation depth. Good thing they didn't trade Marcus Stroman, and they're not going to have Giancarlo Stanton. The American League East is vulnerable. And who won the American League East 2 years ago? The Orioles, who are also a playoff team. The Orioles have a glaring need. They need starting pitching depth, especially after losing Corbin Burns. As I'm going to talk tomorrow with Chuck Freeman, the National League Central is winnable with about 86 or 87 wins. You saw the Milwaukee Brewers, who won 93 games last year and won the division pretty handily, lost a couple of key players and really didn't have a very aggressive offseason. And then the Reds are trying to rebuild. Terry Francona didn't come back to see them lose 90 games, but I'll believe it when I see it. The Cardinals are in full rebuild, and the Pirates are the Pirates until proven otherwise. So if you're the Cubs, who have had an unusual offseason, yes, they did bring in Kyle Tucker, but they also traded away Bellinger, and they weren't super. There were a lot of players I thought they'd be really in on big time, and is Matthew Boyd, was he their biggest free agent signing? I mean, you go down the line of some of the big free agents who were available, and virtually none of them ended up with the Cubs. I thought Walker Buehler was definitely going to go to the Cubs. The Cubs need relief pitching. The Orioles need starting pitching. The Cubs need relief pitching to win winnable divisions. The window of opportunity for the Orioles opened up a little bit. The window of opportunity for the Cubs is wide open right now, but they're a flawed team. And what I don't understand is how there can still be a player like, Quintana was available just the other day. Fine. But, Lance Lynn or Kyle Gibson. Kyle Gibson, I find an interesting cat. He was an Oriole a few years ago. I don't really care about wins. He won 15 games for the Orioles, but, he had a mediocre ERA, but he threw 192 innings. He threw 169 innings last year with St. Louis. He's shown he did okay. He could at least handle pitching in Baltimore. And if you're the Orioles and you look up and you say, hey, we desperately need a major league pitcher who can give us 25, 30 starts this year, and Kyle Gibson is at home playing Wordle, and he's not going to cost you an arm and a leg. He's not going to cost you a draft pick. He's not going to be a long-term deal. Lance Lynn is the same thing. Again, is Lance Lynn, several years ago was, a legit all-star. Yeah, he wasn't a legit all-star last year. He pitched for St. Louis, and he, pitched 117 innings and whatnot. And he's bounced around the last bunch of years between the White Sox and the Dodgers and the Yankees and the Rangers and all that. But you know what? He could still give you 100. So he could give you 15 to 20 starts, and he's just there. And the other thing is you have someone like, David Robertson, who's available. And again, Robertson has his issues too. He's no spring chicken. But if you have him, even for half a season, to have a reliever to stick in the middle of that, and he is available for virtually nothing. I don't understand with these teams that could, fill a hole here or there. Don't fill those holes. Remember the point I made the other day? Those wins, a win here or a win there. There's always a team that just misses the playoffs. I brought up the example of the Diamondbacks last year and the Mariners a few years before that. That one win here or one win there could be the difference between not playing in the playoffs and playing in the playoffs. And if you could just fill your holes, the chances of you losing dumb games is reduced. And the fewer dumb games you have, dumb losses that you have, the better are you have a chance to make in the postseason. So Phil, get that tile grout. The ship has sailed to get an ace. The ship has sailed to get a superstar, but at least get something that's mediocre, because mediocre is better than bad. Now, Larry Jenkins writes in to say Ricketts is either cheap or terrible at business. Either way, Cubs are third in revenue and out of the top 10 in spending. Yeah, that's and when the Red Sox were also cutting costs, the Red Sox and Cubs should be printing money, and they probably do. And I'm not even whether he's cheap or not, Larry. That's almost not even the point. At this point, we're not talking about signing Corbin Burns. We're not talking about signing Roki Sasaki. We're talking about doing you know, the, the bin that you rummage through at CVS to pick up like a remember that they used to have DVDs that you could get for $1. That's a dollar DVD is what we're talking about right now. And those little improvements, we just get one more major leaguer in our rotation and maybe a couple of trips to the rotation, we're not blowing out our bullpen. Makes no sense to me. Orioles and Cubs have a chance to go to the playoffs this year and to improve their team a little bit, just a tiny bit. Could be the difference between that and playing golf. All right. Hey, I got a lot of nice response from people who saw I was sick the other day and they didn't know I was heading to the hospital, but there you go. But thanks so much. There was a couple of things I want to talk about. We a bunch of I had things on the ABS, the ball strike system there. Some people were adamant against having the balls and strikes. I get it, but I think you're going to be wrong about that. I think instant replay has worked out all right. Some of these other things have worked out all right. And notice I'm saying that not every new rule has worked, but some of them have. And I like that they're trying to use the technology we have. Jared Dolphson said something that I 100% agree with. We have parks equipped with the technology to measure the spin rate of the ball. I believe it can be also utilized to make the game more fair by providing a uniform strike zone. Yeah, it's just we're not having robots throw the pitches. The pitchers still have to throw the pitches, but if it's a strike, I want a strike to be called a strike. You know, but again, robots that's not the worst thing in the world. Like Useless Trucker, who writes in a bunch, writes, if ABS does go through, then Sully, hold me back. I'm ready to fight the robots from taking over. I love Billy Martin when he argued balls and strikes. He also brought up Earl Weaver and Bobby Cox. Well, here's something that could be really fun to watch a manager go out and fight the robot. Come on, we could do that. Now, the robots may win because we all saw the opening of Terminator 2. And if you haven't, see it because it's still amazing. But all I want is to have strikes be called strikes, outs be called outs correctly. I want the players on the field doing this, but to be rewarded if they do something, to have the call be correct. And I have no compunction in saying we have the technology to do this. Let's do it. And it won't waste a lot of time. And yes, things like framing pitches and stuff like that will go out the wayside, but so would the whole, oh, he's a great pitcher and oh man, I'm intimidated by him. He's gonna get the call. If it's a borderline call, they're gonna give it to the veteran player. Hey, if he's a veteran player, you should hit the pitch. But I do believe it's coming. I absolutely believe it's coming. I did the episode on ESPN and ESPN's relationship with baseball ending and how ESPN's time has come and gone, but there's something to be said for being nostalgic for the great things that they did. A super unknown 831 says for ESPN was a huge part of my childhood growing up with baseball tonight on replay. I knew at least 5 or 6 players on every team, batting stances, pitchers, winds up. He also talks about web gems and things like that. I'm going to bring up my hospital stay because that reminded me of it. I stayed overnight at the hospital, and while I was there, I'm in my little bed. I have my own room. If I wasn't in excruciating pain, it would have been kind of nice. I'm in my own room. I got a little bed. I can move up and down. I'm not doing anything. I have no responsibilities at that point. I have my little TV remote. I can flip around, and it's got the little speaker on it. And if I need something, I just hit the button, and hey, it was kind of nice. And then they brought breakfast, and everything was pretty cool. The only problem was I was in excruciating pain and attached to a IV. Um, Goro Majima says, "Hope you're feeling better." So like, I am. I am. I'm not 100%. I'm not 100% back, but I'm good enough to do a podcast. But here's what I'm bringing. Flipping around. Um, there was you know, it's not the internet. I'm back to just flipping around watching TV, and I like to have the TV on softly when I'm asleep anyway. But I'm flipping around. I watched Castaway again, the Tom Hanks film. It's a great movie. I've seen it 5 billion times. I think it's a brilliant movie. And I'm flipping around and go like, well, I'm laying in bed here. Might as well watch Castaway again. Um, but then I landed on ESPN. And I have to say that they had ESPN1, ESPN2, ESPNU, ESPN News, maybe. I don't know. There was like 4 ESPNs in a row. And when it was one of those roundtable discussions talking about the NFL draft or something, or the combine, there's no microscope to detect how little I care about that. But then I wound up flipping to one, and it was a basketball game between the University of Montana and Eastern Washington University, which is a college up near Spokane. And I got into it. I love Spokane and Eastern Washington. I have a friend of mine who lives in Spokane, sending one of his sons there. So I was kind of rooting for them, but Montana wound up winning. But it was a close game, and the fans of Montana were going great. And I'm watching, going like, wow, I just sat and watched Eastern Washington versus Montana play basketball. That was pretty fun. And then I was watching highlights of Shea Kilgus Alexander. Shea Kilgus Alexander. I always have trouble pronouncing his name. Who my mom's wondering who that is. He's probably going to win the NBA Most Valuable Player. He plays for the Oklahoma City Thunder. I was watching some highlights about him, and I was like, yeah, I haven't really watched much about him. And then there was a great documentary about the year that the Anaheim Mighty Ducks got to Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final. They beat the Red Wings and they beat the Minnesota. And they went up against New Jersey. I got super into that, and I realized that was what made ESPN great in some ways. Is they would tell stories that you would get into, and because it was on, you wound up watching other sports that are made you have to acknowledge things other than your comfort zone. And while I wouldn't change things back, and while I think ESPN is a dying model, I will say that attached to a bed with IVs and a thing going beep beep, sitting there, sitting back, saying, "Yeah, I'll watch Montana play Eastern Washington. That's not too bad." And something hit me while I was doing that. When ESPN showed a lot of baseball, I'm guessing there were a lot of people who are basketball fans first, or football fans first, or hockey fan first, or whatever. Were exposed to baseball. Were exposed to the drama of baseball, and said, "You know what? I saw a thing there about the 1969 Mets too. That was really interesting." And getting into the drama of that. And while the model of ESPN is probably completely obsolete, it was nice to have a moment where I remembered why I liked it so much. Yes, it's evolved into something that's a little trashy and sensational and has kind of lost its way. Fine. But they, at their peak, were the best at telling sports stories and getting you interested in sports you didn't care about. And now that we're all fragmented, we're all following the music we like, the movies we like. We just had an Oscars where I'm betting most of you hadn't even heard of most of the movies. And the Grammy Awards, forget it. I don't know who was on there. And chances are my mom doesn't know who the MVP of the National Basketball Association was. I can't name 3 hockey players right now. But when they were showing those clips of the Detroit Red Wings, and they were showing the clips of, like, Korea and Jaguar on Anaheim, I remembered all of them because there was at one point I enjoyed the story, and I bet you there was baseball events of the 90s and 2000s that I just was always gonna follow, but someone knew those baseball players' names from the 90s and the 2000s, and I bet they don't know the names of the players of the 2010s and the 2020s. Do you know what? That's losing something. The game tips off. The NBA action is just getting started. There's no better place for it than on FanDuel, which is America's #1 sports book. With FanDuel, you can place live bets on games throughout the game, so you don't have to miss the opening tip-off. If you want to bet on the fourth quarter comeback, you can stay in the action. If you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same game parlay. And then you had games like today. You had the Cleveland. It was a tight game with Miami, but Cleveland wound up holding it off. They won a freaking playoff spot on the 5th day of March. Who knows that? But you're doing that. You can back the Cavaliers, or maybe you're rooting for the Heat to get a late game rally or to hit a clutch free. But you know what? You feel like you never miss a chance because the app is really easy to use. When you win, you get paid instantly. Right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets. If your first $5 bet wins, just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the National Basketball Association. I don't want to lose sight of the fact that today is March 5, and it is the birthday of my 2 boys. My twin sons are 20 years old today. And the odd thing is neither one of them care a bit about baseball. I tried. I tried to make them baseball fans, but I didn't want to be the great Santini and force it down their throats. So I know they're not listening to this right now, but in the off chance you are listening to your pop, happy birthday, buddies. Don't happy birthday to them. Let's see. On this day in baseball history, 2 weird things happened. Fritz Peterson and Mike Kekich of the Yankees showed up to spring training, and they had made a trade amongst themselves. They traded each other's wives. They showed up with each other's wives. And oh yeah, they traded each other's kids and their dogs. Fritz took over Mike's house, Mike took over Fritz's house, and there you go. Do you know what? Love is love. I can't judge. I can't judge. But one thing I will say is another thing happened on this date, and this was earlier in 1966. Marvin Miller became the head of a not exactly powerful players association, and he was he was the president of United Steelwork, and he took over as the executive director of the Players Association in 66 and changed baseball forever and changed the sports landscape forever. You never read this. If you don't know much about Marvin Miller, his biography, I love reading books about the behind the scenes of baseball, and I plowed through this book in like a day, a whole different ball game, which is written by it's not really an autobiography of Marvin Miller. It's his thoughts on the game. Marvin Miller was a big baseball fan, but he also knew that players were being exploited, and they were. Some of them were very well paid. It wasn't that they were poor, but he saw that owners were making money hands over fist, and there was something called the reserve clause that was preventing players from getting the money that they probably deserved. I don't think enough people think about this or realize about this when they talk about players greed or what that. And back in my day, the players stayed with the team and everything. The players all signed a contract that said at the end of the year, if they can't resolve a deal, the owners can renew their previous contract and do that in perpetuity. In other words, if there was a big time dispute, the other player cannot offer their services to other teams. The only way he could offer service to other teams is if his contract was cut. But if you're a player of any quality, you want a raise, you can go ahead and ask for one. Maybe you'll get it, but if you don't, what is your recourse? Now, the only recourse back then was to hold out, to say, I'm not going to show up to spring training. And when you think about some of the players who did that, oh, back in my day, players were loyal. Sandy Koufax did it. Don Drysdale did it. Babe Ruth did it. Joe DiMaggio did it. Everyone did it. In fact, another thing on this day in history was about the Cardinals going to play a goodwill tour in Cuba, but they couldn't bring their superstar Dizzy Dean. Do you know why? He was holding out for a bigger contract. Just, I'm not going to show up till you give me a new contract. Eventually, you play a game of chicken. Marvin Miller was the one who said, wait a minute, that's not right. That's illegal. If anyone else wants to leave their job and go get another one, they have the right to do that. If I want to leave the Locked On Podcast Network, I don't. But if someone offered me Clayton Kershaw money to do with someone else, I would have the right to do that. You have the right to do it. I teach at a public school in California. If another public school offers me a deal, I have the right to go there or not. But players didn't. They were loyal. They had no choice. And Marvin Miller was the one, amongst many other things, to sort of give the players a little bit of, I don't know, courage. And it took the courage of Curt Flood to challenge that system. He initially it didn't work out for him, but they found out how to make how to break down the reserve clause, which was legally, it said we can renew the contract at the end of the year, but it didn't say it could do that in perpetuity. It said you could do it once. And Miller came up with a great idea that if they challenged that, they could challenge the legality of it and bring in free agency. And players were terrified because they figured if they challenge it, they may get blackballed. Because they saw what happened to Curt Flood. Curt Flood was a terrific player for the St. Louis Cardinals who was traded to the Phillies. He didn't want to be traded to the Phillies. He was a 10-year Major League veteran. He said, I don't want to go to the Phillies. Why can't I decide where I play? And he declared himself a free agent. Now, his case went all the way to the Supreme Court, and they lost. I think because, there are a lot of reasons why they lost. I don't think it was because of justice. But players were like, oh, we're already making decent money. Why rock the boat? Curt Flood only played like 20 more games in his whole career after that. But then when a player named Catfish Hunter, a future Hall of Famer, had his contract voided because of there was a breach of contract by the Oakland A's. And so he legally became a free agent because of a breach of contract. And he became a millionaire when he put his face on the open market. Suddenly, all the players' antenna went up, said, we can be millionaires? We thought we could get $100,000. We can become millionaires? So Marvin Miller came up with the idea of, hey, here's how we do it. He got two players, Dave McNally and Andy Messersmith, both pitchers, to not sign a contract to start the year. And the reserve clause renewed their previous contract. But they played the whole year with that renewed contract, but they didn't sign a contract the whole year. And when it got to the end of the year, the team said, okay, we'll renew your contract. And they said, what contract? We didn't sign a contract. You just renewed the past one, but we didn't sign one for this year. They went to an arbitrator. The arbitrator said, yeah, what's the issue? They're free agents. And free agency was born. And salaries went through the roof. But guess what also went through the roof? The value of the franchises. And everyone made more money. And all the other leagues started to see it too. It's because of Marvin Miller. And on this day in 1966, what was probably not even front page news in the sports section was one of the most significant moments in the history of American sports. Something worth remembering. All right. And thank goodness thank goodness that he is in the Hall of Fame now, because he deserves to be. Hey, let's talk about the trivia question, which involves a Hall of Famer. Henry Aaron got 755 home runs. In many people's eyes, he's still the home run king. I will just leave it there. How many of those home runs did he hit in Milwaukee, combined with the Milwaukee Braves and the Milwaukee Brewers? How many of those 755 home runs were hit for the fans of Milwaukee? That is your trivia question. So follow us at Locked On MLB Pods on Twitter or whatever they're calling it these days. And on Instagram, I'm your pal Sully. I'm at Sully Baseball Podcast on Instagram, and I'm here on YouTube. Tomorrow, check out Chuck Freeman and I are going to be talking about the Brewers. That should be a lot of fun. So back from the IL and talking about what I love to talk about, which is sometimes just random baseball stuff. This has been Locked On MLB. I'm your host, Paul Francis Sullivan. Please call me Sully.